happy to see so many of you with your hoodies on.
No justice! No peace!
When Trayvon Martin was first shot, I said that this could have been my son. Trayvon Martin could have been me 35 years ago.
Sanford Police Department.
Hey, we've had some break-ins in my neighborhood, and there's a real suspicious guy.
College students in Florida held rallies today demanding the arrest of a neighborhood watch captain who shot and killed an unarmed 17-year-old. The case has brought new attention to a Florida law that allows anyone to defend himself with deadly force.
And this guy, is he white, black, or Hispanic?
He looks black.
Did you see what he was wearing?
A dark hoodie, like a gray hoodie.
He would have been 27 today.
Trayvon would have graduated from college. He would have his own place. He was a mama's boy. Definitely could say that. But I think he would be doing well.
You know, it's just a kid with his hoodie on. You know,
in the rain.
In the rain.
This is a young man just walking down the street. He wasn't arguing with George Zimmerman. He wasn't doing anything.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Okay.
You had no reason to follow him. You had no authority to do so. All of that stuff came together, and it struck a deep nerve in Black America.
We, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty.
The way in which George Zimmerman has been able to get away with this is not justice for anyone.
Trayvon, Emmett Till, and Ahmaud Arbery, Black people doing ordinary things and being attacked for them and losing their lives for no good reason.
He was like the martyr for change in America.
A lot of NBA players started putting up pictures of themselves and their children wearing hoodies in solidarity with Trayvon Martin.
Probably one of the most memorable things since I've been in the NBA for 17 years.
Is this a movement or is this a moment?
I think that we have had a movement. It's gone beyond a moment. And the consciousness of this nation, I think, has been raised.
Good evening to you, I'm Gail King. 10 years ago, a 17-year-old teenager wearing a hoodie, carrying a bag of Skittles and a can of juice that he had just brought from a convenience store was shot and killed while walking home in Sanford, Florida. The tragic death of Trayvon Martin and the acquittal of the man who killed him moved America in a way that still reverberates today. In fact, a recent CBS News poll found that 10 years later, nearly 3/4 of Americans remember Trayvon Martin's death and his trial. Tonight, we will explore what happened back then, show how everyone from celebrities, professional athletes, and even the President of the United States identified with Trayvon, and examine how his death set the stage for Black Lives Matter and the modern social justice movement. But first, we must begin with the pain and resolve of Trayvon Martin's mother. Her name is Sybrina Fulton. Earlier in February, she marked what would have been her son's 27th birthday, with a weekend of events, including a march with other mothers who have also tragically lost their children.
What did you think when you saw the crowd today?
I think I was good when I woke up this morning. I prayed, I meditated, and so I was feeling really, really like excited, and really ready and really excited. But then when I drove in the gate and I saw so many people, and it just made me tear up. It made me tear up, and it made me realize the impact of Trayvon Martin.
10 years ago, Sybrina Fulton became the mother of a movement.
We got to see past what's in front of us. We can't give up.
Her son, Trayvon Martin, was just 17 years old when he was gunned down while walking back to his father's house from the convenience store. He was shot by George Zimmerman, a neighborhood watch volunteer who was 28.
The pain is still fresh. The hurt is still fresh. The disappointment and sadness is still fresh. So it seems like it happened recently, and I have to remind myself that it's been 10 years.
This year, an annual Peace Walk and Peace Talk held in Trayvon Martin's hometown, Miami, Florida, fell on what would have been his 27th birthday. I have to say, every time I look at that, it's now an iconic photo of him in his hoodie. I see your face. I see you when I look at him. What do you see when you look at him?
I see, at times, pain. I still see Trey. I still see my baby boy. But there is something to smile about, you know? I'm grateful that I did have him for 17 years. But the pain and hurt and bitterness of him not still being here is something that I carry with me every day.
I've heard you say that you turned your pain into purpose. What do you mean?
When this first happened, the tragedy of my son, I can absolutely say that I never thought I would be happy again. I never thought I would smile again. And I asked God for strength because that's what I heard other people saying about me, how strong I was. It didn't happen overnight, but He made me strong. It happened.
Sybrina Fulton realized there was power in sisterhood. She created the Circle of Mothers for women who have lost children or family members to senseless gun violence.
When Sybrina did the Circle of Mothers, I remember I came so broken, but I left so empowered.
It's been a sisterhood that we have formed together to encourage each other, to support each other, to cry with each other.
They're still shooting us, they're still killing us, but we are still visible. We are still telling them that we're not quitting. This is our life now.
What does the Circle of Mothers mean to you?
Well, the Circle of Mothers was a dream that I had. There was no organization, there was no program. There was nothing that I could connect to where there was somebody that says that I know how you feel and actually knew how I feel.
Tamika, do you remember your first conversation with Sybrina?
I remember her showing up for one of the marches we were doing, and I remember just seeing her presence and thinking, I can't believe she came.
Tamika Palmer's daughter, Breonna Taylor, was shot to death by police officers inside of her home in Louisville, Kentucky, 2 years ago. No officers have been charged for her death. Tamika, you know, I've said you two belong to a club that no one wants to belong to. Do Sybrina's words resonate with you?
Absolutely. You don't know how to go on some days. You don't know how to breathe. I got lucky and I got grateful for people like her.
In the 10 years since we've had the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, there were convictions in both of those cases. Does that say to you that times are changing or that times are better?
It is saying to me that we take 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, because now you're seeing people being held accountable for taking a life of color. But by the same token, we're taking 2 steps back because we lost lives. So I believe it's bittersweet.
Justice was deserved, and it should have happened. They shouldn't have had to have fought so long and hard for it. There's still part of this system who feels that they can do whatever they want, whenever they want. And the fact that they think that they can still operate under that is a problem.
Why do you think justice is so hard in these cases, time after time after time again?
Well, I think our criminal justice system is not yet as finely attuned to these kinds of matters as it ought to be.
Eric Holder was the first Black Attorney General serving under the first Black President of the United States. He was in office in 2012 when Trayvon Martin was killed. In a press conference shortly after he was killed, you said this: "I have great faith in our criminal justice system. I am confident through the investigative process that the truth will
ultimately be determined and the appropriate actions will be taken."
When you look back on the case, do you feel the justice system failed Trayvon Martin?
That's an interesting question. I think the justice system certainly elicited all of the facts. We know what happened there. in determining whether or not justice was done, I'm not at all certain that the system served Trayvon or his family well. It was one of the things that I was concerned about and raised when I left the Justice Department, that for the Justice Department to become involved, we had to meet a standard in the federal civil rights laws that I thought was too high. But for that high bar that we had to meet, the Justice Department would have acted. I mean, it's clear that that Zimmerman was at fault. I think legally at fault, criminally at fault for what he did, but our statutes did not allow us to become involved.
I want to know what you think about Sybrina Fulton. She became a national figure because of the death of her son, Trayvon Martin. Do you think it's up to family members to take up this cause?
You know, responsibilities get thrust upon people, and greatness is defined by how you react to that which is thrust upon you. You think about Emmett Till's mother. She did not want to be that person. And I understand, you know, Ms. Fulton didn't want to be that person, and yet she's risen, I think, to the occasion. She is, in fact, one of the mothers of the movement, and she's made the nation better.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
Where are the clothes that he was wearing that night?
It took me 3 years to donate the items to the African American Museum in DC. And so the Smithsonian, it's on display now. His hoodie is there with the hole in his heart, his pants, his shoes, his cell phone, the drink, the candy, and then his flight suit, because he was interested in becoming an aviation mechanic, and he was interested in flying the planes. I felt that I gave my son to the world. Who am I to keep the clothes?
As we sit here today in 2022, what concerns you most 10 years later?
What concerns me most is that we're not at the place where we need to be, both in terms of our criminal justice system. Race still is too large a factor there. Decisions are made with racial backgrounds, and that we as a nation are not yet at the place where we need to be. Back in 2009, I gave a Black History speech where I said that we were a nation of cowards.
We, average Americans, simply do not talk enough with each other about things racial.
I understand our reluctance to do that. It's a painful subject. It's one that it divides us, but we've got to have the strength. We've got to have the courage to talk about things racial if we want to make racial progress.
Trayvon's only crime against him was the color of his skin. And so we got to think about our children. We got to protect our kids. We got to let the world know that our children matter too.
No peace! No justice! No peace!
We want rest!
We are Trayvon! We are Trayvon!
In the winter of 2012, CBS News broadcasted the first national story on the killing of Trayvon Martin. Senior national correspondent Mark Strassman takes us back to what happened that night and how "We Are Trayvon" became a national mantra.
Local 6 News starts now. With a Sunday night local news story.
Officers were called to the Twin Lake townhomes in Sanford last night.
Trayvon Martin's legacy almost died the night he did.
The man had been shot and killed. The shooting suspect surrendered to police.
Near Orlando, a neighborhood watch volunteer called 911 to report a suspicious person.
This guy looks like he's up to no good.
That guy was 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, heading back from a convenience store, doing nothing wrong.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
But George Zimmerman, that neighborhood watch volunteer, confronted Martin anyway. He showed police later how they fought on the ground.
And he just kept slamming it.
And losing the fight, he fatally shot the teenager.
I felt his arm going down to my side, and I grabbed it, and I just grabbed my firearm, and I shot him.
Days went by, no arrest. Police said Florida's Stand Your Ground law protected Zimmerman's claim of self-defense.
He was armed and the victim was not armed.
That's correct.
But no arrest.
No arrest.
Tracy Martin, Trayvon's father, remembers.
We had an admitted killer. We had the actual weapon, but we didn't have an arrest.
Outraged?
Outraged.
At that point, do you have the sense that anybody cared?
No.
Attorney Ben Crump represents the Martin family.
And
Literally, they were saying to me, okay, being a black kid got killed, that happens all the time in America. What's so significant about this?
It must be a little, still kind of odd to be here, huh?
Yeah, it is.
He was lying right here.
When we did the first national story about Trayvon Martin, 11 days after the shooting, it was the first time most people saw his picture, heard his name, and his family's desperation.
My kid went to the morgue, and this guy went home and went to sleep in his bed. There's no justice in that.
Martin's family was in disbelief.
And I remember we did the first national interview with you, Mark Strauss, and CBS, because you all were the first people who said you would do it. And we are grateful eternally for that.
Trayvon had already been forgotten.
Definitely by Central Florida, he had been forgotten.
I remember three of us walking around where it
Back in
happened.
Sanford, yeah.
And not only were you still grieving, but you were clearly frustrated.
Yeah, it was just painful to see that there had been a killing of a young black unarmed teenager.
Your son.
My son, and there was nothing being said or done about it.
Trayvon Martin. Right away, more news outlets reported the story.
Shame on Sanford PD.
Pressure built on police.
Who do we want? Zimmerman.
Florida's governor appointed a special state prosecutor. A national conversation exploded about racial justice.
Trayvon Martin.
Within 3 weeks, he's a household name.
Yeah.
Social media was starting to take hold, and they all hashtag Trayvon Martin Life Matters. LeBron James and the Miami Heat, they put on the hoodies, and they said, we're all Trayvon. And then they had this thing called the Million Hoodie Rally.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Up in New York,
New York
they shut
City,
down New York.
Sybrina Fulton, Trayvon's mother.
This is not about a black and white thing. This is about a right and wrong thing.
President Obama has made his own concerns very clear in very personal terms.
Even in the White House, Trayvon Martin's name inspired soul-searching.
How on earth could a young teenager walking down the street eating Skittles, minding his own business, end up dead? How does that happen in America?
Valerie Jarrett, former President Obama's senior advisor. A month after the shooting, she remembers him telling staff in the Oval Office he wanted to talk about Trayvon.
This was a very personal decision he made to try to lift up this story and make it a teaching moment.
You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. All of us.
And what President Obama wanted to do was to broaden the reach of that statement to reach all Americans, not just black ones.
He spoke about it so personally.
Yes.
Intimately.
Yes.
It meant that much to him?
I think for parents of black boys, particularly in America, it's very personal.
No father more than Tracy Martin.
What was that moment like for you?
Man, it was surreal. This was the highest of high as far as being in position or in power, acknowledging the fact that this is an injustice.
You knew that it was a historical moment. And I knew we had won in the court of public opinion.
We want rest.
Protesters organized marches. And 6 weeks after the killing, George Zimmerman was charged with second-degree murder.
Today, we filed an information charging George Zimmerman with murder in the second degree.
We had high hopes. The arrest of George Zimmerman actually gave us a little belief in the justice system. We just knew that we were going to get a conviction.
We just wanted an arrest, and we got it. And I say thank you.
But in July of 2013, after a 5-week trial,
we, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty.
A Florida jury acquitted Zimmerman of murder and manslaughter charges.
It was heart-wrenching. It was very disturbing.
Zimmerman went free. President Obama again spoke about the case.
Trayvon Martin could have been me 35 years ago.
He asked America an important question.
If Trayvon Martin was of age and armed, could he have stood his ground on that sidewalk?
And I think those personal terms and challenging us all Not saying this is my responsibility solely as the President of the United States, but we all have a collective and individual responsibility to do better by our boys and young men of color.
In Zimmerman's verdict, much of Black America saw a familiar betrayal.
Black people are Charlie Brown, and the criminal justice system is Lucy, holding the football. And every time we come to kick the football, they snatch the football away.
Over the next decade, the name of a social movement, Black Lives Matter, became as recognizable as Trayvon Martin's. The deaths of other black men convulsed America. Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, Eric Garner, George Floyd, most recently, Ahmaud Arbery. You can draw a through line from Trayvon Martin to where we are today.
I don't think since Emmett Till had the killing of a young black person in America has such a profound impact.
You believe Black Lives Matter started with Trayvon Martin?
Oh, the founders talk about it. Trayvon's legacy is that he raised the consciousness level in America of the plight of black people, especially young black people.
To Trayvon Martin's parents, that legacy, what he inspired, gives a measure of comfort 10 years after a needless loss that rattled our social consciousness.
This kid's name resonates across the world, and we'll use this as our starting point to get justice for the next kid.
You didn't see a lot of athletes speaking out on issues of social justice, but that changed so dramatically after Trayvon Martin was killed.
The tragic death of Trayvon Martin had a profound effect on the sports community. CBS News special correspondent James Brown examines how one tweet of a team wearing hoodies galvanized athletes into a new era of activism.
In the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, being a professional athlete gave you an enormous platform. Athletes were showcasing their skills, talents, and brands on a global scale. But there was one thing many weren't doing.
You didn't see a lot of athletes speaking out on issues of social justice, particularly racial justice.
Dave Zirin is the sports editor for The Nation magazine.
You didn't see mass movements for racial justice and civil rights in the 80s and 90s. And without those movements, you don't see the ripple effect into the world of sports. The need and the pressure on athletes to take care of their families and their friends has become more important. So there was a whole culture to not be political in the 80s and 90s, but that changed so dramatically after Trayvon Martin was killed.
Why was the Trayvon Martin killing such a flashpoint?
Trayvon Martin was their Emmett Till. The experience of seeing what his body looked like, the photos of it, the bravery of his mother, Mamie Till, showing the world what they did to her son.
Till's death haunted one of America's greatest sports superstars to be more than just an athlete.
That scarred a young amateur boxer named Cassius Clay. He saw his own face in Emmett Till's. Muhammad Ali would speak about that a lot. They saw themselves in his face, in his hoodie, in his Arizona iced tea, in his Skittles. They said that could have been me.
As an African-American male, we wear hoodies all the time. I mean, I got one on right now. And so when I found out what had happened and who it happened to, it was scary.
Chris Paul is a point guard for the Phoenix Suns and former president of the NBA Players Association.
What really hit home for myself, I may go into this arena in this game and play in front of these 20,000 fans who are screaming your name, cheering for you, and that's all good and well. But as soon as that game is over and you go get in your car, you are just like everyone else. I'm Chris Paul, an African-American black man who was driving home.
Trayvon, you won't forget! Trayvon, you won't forget!
As anger over Trayvon's death grew, the sports world was ready to respond. And it started with a tweet. from one of the most influential teams in the world, the Miami Heat.
They all posed with hoodies. They wrote Trayvon's name on their sneakers. They did a team photo. Black players, white players, players from all across the world, all standing together with their hoodies on in solidarity with Trayvon Martin. And that was a huge game changer because that photo of the Miami Heat was really the first viral sports politics photo.
3-on-1, James!
Trayvon's death impacted one of this generation's greatest sports superstars, LeBron James, using his brand, play, and power towards activism, both on and off the court.
It starts with the Trayvon Martin, situation. If my boy left home and he never returned,
Right.
that kind of hit a switch. From that point on, I knew that my voice and my platform had to be used for more than just sports.
A new era of a socially conscious athlete was unfolding, and if one needed proof, the opening of the 2016 ESPY Awards, one of the biggest nights for sports, was it, as the most famous NBA players opened the evening with a call for social justice.
We cannot ignore the realities of the current state of America.
When you decided to open the ESPY Awards with a call for change and action, can you take us back through what that decision-making process was like?
We have a group chat, us four. Melo had put a message in the chat talking about some social injustice and things that were going on, and was like, fellas, what are we gonna do? And then that started the conversation and reached out to ESPN and said, we would like to open up the ESPYs with this.
Laquan McDonald, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile. This is also our reality.
As athletes began to form an identity for racial equality, the reality of America would remind them how hard it can be. San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick would test America's resolve on dissent. At the start of the 2016 football season, Kaepernick sat down and would later kneel during the national anthem to bring attention to police brutality and racial inequality.
I couldn't see another hashtag Sandra Bland, hashtag Tamir Rice, hashtag Walter Scott, hashtag Eric Garner. The list goes on and on and on. At what point do we do something about it?
Race relations had just tackled America's favorite sport.
That act of taking a knee during the anthem is such a specific challenge to this country. What you're saying is that there is a gap between what this country promises and what it actually delivers.
The following season, Colin Kaepernick was not signed by an NFL team and has not played professional football since. What was yours and some of your colleagues' reaction when you saw the reaction to Colin Kaepernick taking a knee?
Man, my reaction was, this is bigger than the game. Like Colin sacrificing everything that he did, whereas a lot of people don't even listen to the details, right? And didn't even care to understand that it wasn't about the flag or anything like that.
When he used his platform as a quarterback in what is by any measure the most culturally powerful entity in the United States, the National Football League, that had a ripple effect unlike anything else.
A ripple effect felt by all athletes. And Chris Paul had to navigate how to give players who were trying to be agents of change a voice. Especially during the summer of 2020, as the country was gripped with protests over George Floyd's killing and the coronavirus pandemic, which forced the NBA to play their season in a bubble.
We went there with this singular focus of, we're going to play these games, but we want to raise more awareness about different things that are affecting our communities.
For Paul, it was an opportunity to organize in real time.
The Bucks have been in serious discussion about boycotting tonight's game.
When the Jacob Blake situation happened, we said, hey, just stop everything. Let's all get in a room and let's talk about what we can do, how we can be impactful, and how can we be as strong as possible.
Despite the overwhelming plea for change, there has been no action. So our focus today cannot be on basketball.
While inside the bubble, players spoke about criminal justice reform, wore shirts about racial justice, and some even took a knee during the national anthem.
It really showed me how powerful our league is as a whole. the NBA and WNBA.
We have decided it's important to take a stand and raise our voices.
I want to give a huge shout out to the women at the WNBA. They're the strongest women out there, and I'm forever grateful that we're connected to our brothers and our sisters.
Is there any incremental hope that what you and your colleagues are doing will make a difference?
You know, the young people are the most powerful when it comes to voting, when it comes to change. So when you engage the younger community, they really understand how powerful their voice is and how when they're connected, they can make change. So I'm definitely not giving up hope. And we're gonna continue to try to do our part.
Courage is contagious. It has this ripple effect where other athletes say, well, I can do that too. And they are all feeling like they are more than just athletes.
You can share different ideologies, whatever you want, but when the people come together, that's when people start to listen.
Marches and protests have punctuated the last decade, most recently in 2020, after the killing of George Floyd. CBS News national correspondent Jerika Duncan explores how this modern social justice movement all began with a boy named Trayvon.
The 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was shot and killed by a man who was patrolling the area, he says, as part of the local neighborhood watch group.
It was horrible. We was working. I was working in Miami, and it was all over the news, and we felt a huge way about it. It was a real moment, you know, it was a real moment.
You remember that day? I remember that day. I remember just feeling like I needed to connect to other people, and the way I connected was by showing up onto the streets and protesting and marching and saying his name over and over and over.
I had just attended the NBA All-Star game and, began to see the social media about what was going on. People began texting me, began tweeting me, are you gonna talk about this? Look at what happened to this young man.
I remember listening to the tapes. I remember just being moved by the fact that nothing had happened to stop what was going on. This really just moved me into a whole nother, this is the next 10 years of my life.
Activist Philip Agnew and Carmen Perez marched and protested. Rapper Fat Joe used his voice to speak out. Professor Michael Eric Dyson educated and provided context, all connected by a tragedy that shook the nation and the world.
As we're starting this interview, you wanted to keep your hood on, sort of in honor
I
of...
rep my hood like Trayvon. So in honor of Trayvon, I wanted to wear my hood, and there's nothing wrong with wearing the hood.
As far as Trayvon as a student, you actually had a unique connection.
But what happened was, I have a friend, he was the dean of the school that Trayvon went to. So what's crazy is I went to the school and I talked to the kids, but I didn't know Trayvon Martin was there listening to me talk.
Wow.
It's crazy because here's a kid who's listening to me say positive stuff, but yet and still, he goes out and he's killed for no reason.
We, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty.
When you think about the moment we learned that George Zimmerman was acquitted.
I knew he wouldn't be going to jail. I live in Florida, so I know to stand the ground. It's crazy because the law just says, if you're frightened and somebody scares you, you could kill them, legally. That's the law.
The way in which George Zimmerman has been able to get away with this is not justice for anyone. Certainly not the family, but for the country. We could still see something like this happen, and there's no accountability. You believe there could be another Trayvon Martin, even today, 10 years later? I do. I think if we don't change these policies, if we don't re-examine what public safety looks like, we're gonna continue to see this.
We understand stand your ground still exists. And so the fight is still very long way from being won. We threw a punch and we landed, and the counter punch was very, very strong. And we've seen the counter wave across the country. And so if we're not organized, if we're not prepared, we're gonna be very, very sad about the state of affairs of this country.
I am Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin.
The death of Trayvon was an extraordinary moment that galvanized black communities that spotlighted the work that grassroots organizations were already doing. There's something new called into existence as a result of Trayvon's death.
And what was that new?
For the first time, we heard the words Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Trayvon Martin's death really put the spotlight on Black Lives Matter. How did Trayvon Martin's death move that movement forward?
It put a face to it. BLM, they were already organizing, but it wasn't until Trayvon's face was attached to it. So many young people started organizing around that.
Look, activism goes in cycles. Some extraordinary events occur, sustained social mobility and movement is a result. It peters out inevitably.
The revolution!
But unlike the civil rights movement from before, which was centralized, social media fueled the proliferation of the Black Lives Matter movement, embraced by not only athletes, but politicians, artists, who became activists in their own right.
In the past, we had that one leader, which we call the spider ideology. If you cut the head of a spider, it dies. But if you cut the leg of a starfish, it multiplies, and that's what a decentralized structure is. There are so many leaders across the country that are not just looking at Black Lives Matter, but they're also looking at reproductive justice rights, voting rights. They're looking at different things, and we have to recognize that in all of that, Black Lives Matter still exist.
We've got to do everything that we can to ensure that everyday people understand that we actually have a plan forward for where this country needs to go. Decentralized organization only works when you have a very strong central core. And so that's one of the other duties of our movement today. It also doesn't mean that we throw out the blueprint of what has worked before. We need to combine that with what we're doing now.
What does the future look like for movements like Black Lives Matter?
I always say we come together like Voltron, right? If you bring this gift, then we are powerful. Fat Joe lends his voice. We need that. Artists are the gatekeepers of truth. They're civilization's radical voice.
So you can take one person and make change.
I've always been involved with social justice. It's almost like the sister Carmen Perez said, we need a bunch of leaders. We need to look everywhere you look, everybody pitching their voice.
And more voices have in the last decade, with urgent calls for justice and accountability.
Trayvon's death and George Floyd's death are bookends of a dual reality that black people continually confront. Look at the parallels between Trayvon, Emmett Till, and Ahmaud Arbery. Black people doing ordinary things.
All this was in their face to where they couldn't lie. And they couldn't say they didn't know what was going on. And so that's why you saw people saying Black Lives Matter, but you see just as much white people, Asian people, Hispanic people out there. But when the people come together, that's when people start to listen.
I do believe that the young generation that is coming up, is growing up, really prepared to fight for a new value system in this country. They, en masse, really have a more progressive outlook of what this country is and what it should be. And so it's there that I find a lot of hope for our liberation movement.
Trayvon Martin gave us the opportunity to look at things and have the self-awareness. George Floyd gave us the opportunity and the permission to go out into the streets, but really having this moral awakening because of Trayvon Martin has allowed for all these other things to happen in the world. And if it wasn't for that foundation, we wouldn't have a women's march. We wouldn't have t-shirts that say, the future is female.
Trayvon's death meant that a movement was born to solidify the meaning and mattering of black life. And that's something that I think will never go away.
The fight for a better future is indeed a war worth waging.
Understanding the legacy of Trayvon Martin is both painful and hopeful. There is hope that things will get better, but the pain of his loss and others like him is still very raw. We end tonight with a commentary from Roy Wood Jr., correspondent for The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. For all of us here at CBS News, we thank you for joining us. I'm Gayle King. Good night.
So where are we now? That's the question that's the most difficult to ask. It's also the question that's the most difficult to answer. I mean, for sure, there's been progress. But even the definition of progress has become fluid. You know, keep your eyes on the prize, but half the time the prize sits on the horizon, unobtainable, constantly being moved. That man killed Trayvon, but hey, at least they arrested him. But then he walked, but at least they arrested him, right? Is that progress? I mean, at least now some of the people get arrested and a couple of them go to jail and a couple of them even go to jail for life. But usually, if you can arrest and convict, they still get in less than 20 years. But that black life is gone forever. We can agree to call that progress, but you damn sure can't call it justice. Hey, there's too much killing. Maybe the cops should wear body cams. Yeah. Oh, hey, there's too much killing. Maybe the cops should wear body cams and turn them on. Hey, there's too much killing. Maybe the cops should wear body cams, turn them on, and release the footage.
Hey, stop.
The horizon keeps moving. We got somebody's attention though. Voting Rights Act, CRT misinformation, they trying to gerrymander history out of the history books. You know how afraid you got to be of the truth to gerrymander a book? The future has always been under attack, but now they're attacking the past. Because they know if we forget the past, then we're more likely to believe that the future isn't worth fighting for. But if we haven't learned anything else with progress, the fight for a better future is indeed a war worth waging. So we battle on to the horizon.
Keep a walking.